Welcome to Behind the SME, the podcast where we dive into the stories of founders, leaders, and visionaries of small and medium-sized enterprises. As the CEO of a small business myself, I want to uncover what drives the success of SMEs by talking to those who are in the trenches, building their businesses from the ground up. I hope you enjoy the episode. Roei, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate you taking the time to spend some time on the sofa. I'm fascinated to hear your story. You've got an interesting background, a couple of really cool businesses that you've been involved in. So I'm really interested to unpack a few topics. Tell me, what's the whistle-stop tour of your journey so far?
Yeah, of course. Well, first, thanks so much for having me here. Super excited to be sitting on the couch opposite you for this conversation. In terms of my background, I started working with technology from a pretty young age, originally playing around with early video content creation tools. I was 15 when YouTube launched. Obviously, that was the obsession. And then in 2013, founded my first tech company. That business was essentially a content creation toolkit. So helping people create videos, podcasts like this, helping them optimize that content for social. And if you can believe, just 10 years ago, at that time, all sports journalists were still trying to be in print. Like that was the ambition. Obviously, everything transitioned online when Twitter had that big renaissance of sports journalism. And just after Twitch had launched, so loads of people using our tools for those platforms. We ended up working with the Premier League, the NBA, NFL, far more exciting than fintech in terms of the perks, but so it goes. We scaled that business to about 6 million monthly users, acquired by a gaming company in 2018, then started doing some angel investing, advising some startups, and that's how I started building out Connected, which, as you know, brings tools to the early stage ecosystem.
Amazing. Wow. I mean, 2013 through 2018, so 5-year journey from inception through sale.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
mad.
Yeah, it was crazy. And a lot of right time, right place. But also there were a lot of things that forced us to sell a bit earlier than we wanted to. And a great lesson for any business leader is timing is everything. You've seen that over the last few years, even if you raised one of these mega rounds in 2021 at a high valuation and now struggling to justify that. So timing's everything. And you'll remember this, but around sort of 2016, 2017, there was this massive pivot in online models from eyeballs to subscription. You had all these businesses like Lad Bible and Social Chain, which were killing it based on views. And we were one of those companies. You had millions of monthly users getting, hundreds of millions of views a month on content and everything. And overnight, everything just flipped to subscription. And loads of businesses, including ours, took that hit from a valuation perspective. So we found ourselves at a point where I was 26. I had tens of thousands of pounds of credit card debt personally. I had put everything I possibly could into building that business. And we got the option for a good exit. So it was a no-brainer at the time, but certainly lots of lessons to be learned.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like just the steepest learning curve imaginable in a short space of time. So following that, you took some time just to take stock and work out what you wanted to do next, because that's a young age to have a bit of cash in your pocket and all of this available time and this experience under your belt. So what happened next?
Yeah, well, as you can imagine, as a 26-year-old going overnight from tens of thousands of pounds in credit card debt to a multi-million exit was a lot of fun, but a lot of learnings as well in terms of did things wrong, wasn't necessarily as smart as I should have been in some ways. But one of the really grounding experiences that I had after that was the year lock-in that we had post-exit. And the CEO of Gfinity at the time was a guy called Gary Cook. And Gary was the CEO of Man City. He was on the board of the UFC and Nike. So being in his senior management team and working directly with him for that year was incredible learning. So really, really valuable side. And then probably took like 4, 5, maybe 6 months out after the year lock-in just to, try get back from burnout, really.
Yeah. Okay. A few topics I really want to pick up on, right? Burnout's one of them because it's a topic that I know that our listeners, SME business leaders, often on the precipice of. But you obviously sold at the right time from what you've described. What were some of the indicators for you at that point, where you went, yeah, and this is the point, guys, we can't carry on any longer, we need to exit now? Give us a steer on some of that stuff.
So to be honest, I think we actually exited 2 years too late.
Really?
So that timing is everything point is we missed the timing.
Right.
Because we were just after that change to subscription model, where we tried to pivot into subscription model. So we had all these millions of monthly users and really high engagement. I mean, they loved the product, the data we had on them, understanding, who was consuming what, especially at a time where esports and gaming was getting big. So we were awesome at that side. But as you know, it takes years to build conversion funnels from free to paid and free to subscriber. And we were too late for that. So if we had sold in 2016, it would have been a really different story. But selling in 2018, after that, okay, well, great, you've got views, but where's the subscription revenue? Meant we didn't get the exit that we wanted. It was still, life-changing for me at the time, but from a timing perspective, we did miss it. The reason we were fortunate is Gfinity, the company that acquired us, they were amazing at doing these big enterprise deals. So they were, I don't know if you remember the Formula 1, the Premier League, all of those big activations. Gfinity was behind all of that. They just had zero distribution. So they were awesome at creating the content and doing the deals, but they just had zero community, zero distribution. We had all the community. Sure. So it was very fortunate. Like if we hadn't had a strategic buyer, probably wouldn't have had the exit. Yeah,
interesting. And I guess there must have been moments throughout that 5-year window where you could see the rise of this other model. And you sat down in a room with your team going, what do we do here? Do we stick to our guns, being kind to us over the last few years, or do we move? Do we move with the times? Like, obviously hindsight is 2020, but what would you say to someone that's feeling like there's a change going on in their industry, but it's fundamental, and how to kind of read the room and see the bigger picture?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and I can imagine everyone listening to this has been there sitting in that seat, and it's a really tough one. And the reality is, because we never focused enough on revenue generation, we were just focusing on acquiring eyeballs and users and daily active users, monthly active users. We didn't have the luxury of revenue for a pivot. So we had to double down. We couldn't do that. And that's why with Connected and anything I will ever do from now on, everything is downstream from revenue. Because that was what will give you the time and the space and the resource to figure it out along the way. So for me now, everything is downstream from lead gen and conversion to paying customers, because otherwise the world's too fickle, right? I mean, there are far too many trends and hype cycles to be able to bank on anything other than monetization.
Okay, so that's fascinating. So what you're saying is, if the model's right and you're prioritizing cash in the model that you've currently got, that creates space for agility. And so you could have actually progressed a dual strategy there, kept one going, plug some cash into strategy 2, and then you're covered on both bases.
100%. If you can use sales to fund research and development, I mean, then you're laughing, right? Because that's it. Ultimately, if you're working with customers to find solutions that are good for them, that they are willing to pay for, and then you can develop off the back of that, I mean, that's your quickest route to product market fit, right?
Yeah.
Because they're genuinely buying that solution. Yes, there'll be optimization and iteration. But yeah, PTSD from having a high cash burn business without those revenue levers. So yeah, never again.
Yes. So, okay. So if I was to sit down with you in 2016 and ask you a question, Roei, what's your metric for success in the business right now? What would you have said?
It would have been weekly and monthly active users.
So literally just the big numbers, right? Yeah. Where did that come from? Just out of interest.
In terms of why it was a focus for us?
Yeah.
Well, at that time, because it's funny, like when we started out in 2013, it was still a thing where people were like, oh, how are you going to feed yourself in views? It was, we take like online content monetization for granted.
Yeah.
And like how standard it is. but people weren't sure what it looked like back then. People were still talking about banner ads and CPMs and like those sorts of things. And, oh, well, if you're going to use the banner ad model, then this many million views means, so the rate of innovation and development of monetization of online content meant that what we had gone all in on, had we started like 3-4 years earlier, Jason, I can't pronounce his last name, the guy who early investor in Uber, on the All In podcast in the US, like wrote the book called Angel.
Not sure.
Massive San Francisco angel investor, right. like one of the biggest. Like how he made his initial bit of money was an AOL blog.
Right.
It was that online content at that time, monetization. I think I can't remember how much they sold for. I think it was like a couple 100 million. It's just an online blog.
Wow.
Right now, you couldn't imagine that. And I'm not talking about more than 15 years ago. Right. So I think just the, at that time, because the understanding of how you would monetize was less mature than it is now, it's like, cool, if we build it and we own the audience, we can figure out the monetization later. Now people want to see the conversion funnel much earlier, at least in the UK anyway.
And has that been driven by investors, or is that your experience, or a bit of both?
It's an interesting question, and I think this is where there's a big departure in the UK and the US. So I'm an angel investor in a company called Laps. I invested in them in 2021, and they, as far as I'm aware, they've never monetized. Don't think they make any money, but they announced last year they raised 30 million Series A and 80 million pre-money, led by Greylock, who's the ex-CEO of Snapchat, and they haven't made a penny.
Wow.
Yet. Right. So UK versus US are very different landscapes, but in the UK, we're not designed for those types of businesses. The businesses that we're talking about, that we look at, you've got to have that early monetization now.
Yeah.
From what I've seen anyway.
Yeah.
And it is my experience, and probably there'll be many people who listen to this like, yeah, well, what about this company? And that's fair enough, but I don't know.
Yeah. And I guess, there's two drivers here, isn't there? There's investors' priorities and there's your priorities as a founder, right? And clearly you were putting in a serious shift in your first venture, and it sounds like almost quite a lucky escape, right? If that had rolled on, if there hadn't been the right buy, then like you said, you would have been left with a stack of debt. Obviously you entered Connected with a completely different set of priorities. What's your first step on that? Obviously you did raise some money, but tell us about the journey and your mindset walking into Connected, based on that early experience.
Lucky escape is a good way of putting it, by the way, 100%. I think I also made tons of mistakes with Connected and continue to make tons of mistakes with Connected. Where's the fun if you don't? I don't think you're challenging or pushing yourself enough if you're not constantly messing up. I think I know that I founded Connected with the wrong motivations. Because I think when you have your first exit as a founder, regardless of what that looks like, there's such a identity death / crisis / what am I now? What am I going to do? Who am I? Especially at that age. And the amount of hours that you put into building a business, you sacrifice relationships and friendships and all those other things. Then you have that real moment of clarity where it's like, who am I? What do I do now? What do I do next? And I think I just needed to found something to sort of reclaim my identity as a founder, which now looking back at it as a 32-year-old of being like, okay, that's such a mindset I had in my mid-20s where it was all about ego in that way. So I think I rushed into something which I was really passionate about, excited about, but didn't necessarily have the right motivations for starting another business again. But obviously, it's been an incredible journey so far. We just launched in the US, so my energy, my passion, my drive for it is greater than I ever had with real sport. But I wouldn't say necessarily my head was in the right place whilst founding it.
Yeah, interesting. Are you fearful now of exiting a business because of that period, that loss of identity, that window?
I would say, a multi-year course of therapy and psychedelics means that for me, like, I would say now my motivations are in such a right place as a result, because now it's more about, okay, what's the purpose that I can have? Like, being able to just do things that are meaningful, help others, get good outcomes for people. It's all about that, and no longer about the identity thing. For me, is how I feel with it now. So I feel like I'm in a good place, but we can ask after the next exit, and maybe it'll be a new crisis.
Yeah, it's so interesting because right now you go to work, you have a team of 80. When you say something, they listen. When you write on LinkedIn, you have a huge audience. You're learning constantly, you're making mistakes. It's a platform for you to evolve as a leader, a businessman, a tech entrepreneur, an investor. There's just so many parts which exist and are important to you and make up a huge amount of your identity. And what it sounds like is that once the pen is on the paper and the ink is dry, that just goes away in a moment. Is that fair?
It's a great question. I try to be really authentic with that stuff, and I think it's super important to, because life should be about teaching and learning. And I know that the most impactful moments, and I'm sure, and I'd love to know about some of these for you, but sometimes when you just hear the right words, or you run into a lesson that you needed, or some validation, and it's often that thing which you're avoiding. It's often that piece of advice which like touches that thing in the back of your head, where you're like, oh, that's sort of like triggered me in a little way, or made me think about part of my business I didn't really want to think about, or why is that frustrating me? That's often where the most growth happens. And I don't know about you, but for me, sometimes seeing content in that way is exactly what I need to help me open up a new pathway, or think of something in a different way. And if we can all just teach and learn, like, that's a really good place to be.
Do you know what it sounds like? It sounds like you are weathered now. In that you've had that first experience, and so you're not fearful of it at all. You see it in a completely different lens, which is fascinating. I'm trying to unpick whether or not there's this kind of fear of it again. You're not scared of it again. You just see it in a different light. It's much more purpose driven now.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you got 55 in your team. I know that regardless of like any noise anywhere else, and I think as a man, this is actually a big thing for me, or at least it feels that way. I don't know about you, but at the end of the day, like, when I have a really tough day at work, or a tough month, or a tough whatever it is, I'm like, okay, but I'm feeding 55 mouths. The work that I'm doing, like, actually one of the biggest purposes that I can have is I've created a good working environment where people can come and be authentic and make relationships, and not have that Sunday night moment where they want to jump out a window because they're dreading going into work on Monday. And I think genuinely being able to create that environment where people can then grow, thrive, develop, feed their families, do all those other things. I think there's so much purpose in that, regardless of anything else. And when the times are tough and it's so easy to get drowned out in like, oh God, what's going to happen? Like, are we going to exit this transaction going to happen? Are all these things? Like, I think there's so much purpose in the day to day of building a work environment where people can have those things. So I think trying to sort of go back to the present moment's useful.
Yeah, you and I could not be more aligned on that stance. I think the thing which I find is the biggest burden on me, and is the weight of responsibility for feeding 55 insatiable minds. People are entrusting their growth and development with me. Not entirely, obviously. There's a lot of people that share that responsibility, but as the principal leader, you do feel a huge amount of that burden. And you really want to create the space for them to be successful without creating too much space that it's anarchy. You want structure without robots. Finding that exact balance so that people can be the best versions of themselves, all in the interests of a singular goal. whew, you know, that's the thing which I wake up thinking about and go to bed at night thinking about.
100%. This is it. You know, your investors, they're spreading their bets, right? They've got 20 companies they're invested in. They've got all these other things. You know, your customers, okay, they're super important, but they don't live and die by you. Well, not in our industry anyway. Maybe if you're in like medical devices, maybe that's different. But in our world, but your team members are giving you some of their best years of their lives, and like their time and that resource they don't get back. So 100% that responsibility that you have, like forget for any founder or business owner, like you can't have this. I don't think you should have this like grandiose idea of like my exit and like take care of the home first. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And from my perspective, look, Connected has done things wrong. Definitely. We're a startup. We make mistakes. We're growing business. We're in many ways still figuring out our ass from our elbow in so many ways. But in terms of the culture that we've built, and in terms of, I know when I come into the office, what I love is like genuinely, we've got people there in suits. We've got people there in pajamas. Like just do whatever's good for you. And that makes me happy, genuinely.
Yeah. Interesting. Let's unpack for our listeners the balance which we're describing here about space to be themselves, space to express themselves, bring their best selves, but you know, within the confines of a structure. And there does need to be, you know, a form of structure. How have you approached that? Have you approached the creation of that culture?
I'm a little bit all over the place as a person, right? So I would say that having a mix of management styles in our leadership team has been really important. My COO, she's amazing, but she is so structured. Like, thank God she's so structured, because I'm the opposite of that. And I think having diversity of thought is really important at senior leadership and executive leadership level, because ultimately what you'll find with hiring managers is they'll hire, you know, pretty much within a couple degrees of congruence of themselves. You know, maybe a little bit different in terms of experience, background, but like for values and all those things, they'll hire pretty closely to themselves, even though they might try not to. So ensuring that you've got that diversity within your hiring managers is a really important way of fostering a culture which says, cool, I can see myself reflected at different levels of this business.
And do you in that, to create that, would you say to your hiring manager, my natural tendency is X, Y, Z. I think for this role, we need ABC. Are you that explicit with them? Or does it happen just throughout the interview process, do you think?
I would say now we're at a stage where I'm not really touching the hiring process in that way. I really have faith in that sort of level of the team to go and hire in the way that they need to. Ultimately, it's more about agreeing KPIs, right? And if we understand what the KPIs are going for, I will trust someone to build a team in the way that they believe that they can achieve those KPIs. Because it took us 2.5 years to go from 2 people to 10 people. And in the last 2 years, we've gone from 10 to like 85. And
that's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. So I know those 10s so well. So because we were working like so closely together in that period of time, it's now I've got full trust for them to go and build in that way.
Yeah, okay. So you had that nice window
yeah,
to go, this is our identity, this is our culture, these are our values. We had an interesting experience a couple of years back where we like to hire based on values. You know, it's a common thing to do. And we were looking at our interview process, and we were saying in our interviews, one of our values is X. You know, tell us a little bit about, you know, how you link with that value and some experiences that you might have that demonstrate that you also share that value. We were giving them the answer and then asking them to give a nice story which validated it. And of course, what happens is everyone was goes, wow, really values aligned. And it was just such a silly moment where we went, why don't we ask questions that, you know, put them on a bit of into a challenging scenario, and we can understand whether or not they take the route which is values aligned or not. And it was one of those really easy tweaks that meant that the people coming in were much more aligned.
Yeah, that's I've definitely made that mistake
Yeah.
before. But do you ever feel, and we just recently hired our first full-time in-house FD. We used to use a fractional
Yep.
FD, like CFO, fractional CFO type thing. And when I spoke to him for the first time, it reminded me of when I spoke to my COO, my CRO, my CMO for the first time. Don't you think though, when you have that standout candidate, you just know?
Oh yeah,
It's like
100%.
an energy thing. It's almost an unspoken thing where it's just like, I know that that is the right hire.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I always say to the team that walk out of an interview, go, I'm not really sure. It's a no then. Either it's hell yes or it's no.
If you're not sure, you are sure. It's a no.
Yeah, 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 100%. So you spoke before about prioritizing cash, just to change tack a little bit now. I'm interested in, your product-led platform. You must have had to get over the cold start conundrum is probably the best way of describing it. For those that are new to it, tell us a little bit about what the cold start conundrum is, as a platform, and how you would go about and how you did go about getting over it.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a traditional marketplace model, the cold start problem that you'd have is that you're trying to make your revenue by taking a take rate, a commission on a transaction between a supply and demand. And normally for most marketplaces, in order to build up the sufficient level on one or either side, especially if it's something as differentiated as the network that connected is, rather than I need to get an Uber, or it doesn't matter what car, you need to have significant variety and differentiation in supply and demand for that type of marketplace model to work. So knowing that from early on, we realized we had to build some SaaS enablement for one side of the marketplace in order to monetize and build that critical mass before releasing to the other.
Interesting.
So the way that we tackled it with Connected is we started by building tools that startups find useful in their growth. Reporting, stakeholder reporting, investor management, things that didn't require a marketplace to have value for the startups. So we were able to start selling to startups, selling the software that we built for the startups immediately without having to sell network or discovery. So we only started onboarding advisors and talent a year after we launched.
Wow.
So for year one, we were just selling software to startups to build up that critical mass. And then we were able to start releasing it to the other side of the network.
And that was a purposeful exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. So probably the best case of it is, do you know OpenTable?
Yeah.
So the way that OpenTable launched was exactly that, SaaS-enabled marketplace. And it was something that I read an article on, NFX, really, really good startup blog, tech blog, if anyone hasn't seen it, talking about they built table booking systems for restaurants. That was the initial business model because they didn't have the critical mass of customers to have any restaurant paying for being discovered when there was no consumer. So they built up value by this table booking system, which restaurants could use internally without the discovery of the platform. And then again, sales-led R&D.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
You're using that sale to then develop the rest. And then we're really fortunate as well, because we have that highly differentiated supply and demand, we don't have geographic sensitivity. Because if you're a B2C fintech within payments who needs help with performance marketing, especially post-COVID, doesn't matter if that person's London or Dubai or Madrid or Miami, if they are the right person, to our point before, they are the right person. So what we've seen is over 94% of our customers are open to connecting internationally. So the reason why we've gone from 0 to 1 million ARR in the US in 9 months is because actually the network in the UK satisfies the demand in the US. So there's a really nice cross-border network effect. So we never really have the cold start problem.
It's also interesting, to our point before about prioritizing cash and income and a revenue stream. You structured your strategy plan purposefully to get over a cold start conundrum by creating something, I imagine, fairly rudimental, but sellable, cash, income straight away, people feeling value, building the start of a client base on one side of the two-sided coin. But it was cash led. You weren't just getting a wait list together for free, with zero commitment. There was income coming in out of the gate. How did you do that? Was there a bunch of people on the phone? Were you networking?
Me on the phone.
Really?
Yeah, I love
Okay.
it. I love.
Wow.
I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
as a founder, like you're a salesperson more than anything, right? We're either selling equity to investors, product to customers, dreams to employees. Do you know what I mean? Like sales is the fundamental skill. So yeah, I was selling firsthand, and then just started to build from there. But then when it came to raising the first capital, it was like, right, we've already generated 50, 60, 70 grand in sales after the first few months. And I was obviously fortunate as an exited founder. I didn't have to pay myself at the start. So some unfair advantages, which, totally being realistic about. But it meant that, yeah, like we could build something which could have been cash flow positive had we not, continued to invest in R&D. But it's, for me, it's like, there is so much noise there on LinkedIn. One of the reasons why I want to post this stuff and I try and talk about it so openly is because I genuinely believe that if you can cut out the noise and just distill the fact that building a business is about finding market demand and selling to it, anyone can build a business, right? Like it's not actually rocket science. So that's what I want everyone to see is like, if you feel struggling or frustrated, like just see what sells and follow that.
Yeah. And I assume I've never been through a raise myself. I'm a bootstrapper, proud of it. Right.
Love that. Jealous as well, to be honest.
Slow. It's a slower journey, put it that way. But yeah, different choice. I assume though that once you've got, some proof points from having, I think you said 70, 80 grand coming through, the valuation is different and the raise is easier.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it depends on the market. We did get fortunate with timing early on. We raised in 2021
Right.
at a 20x of ARR, which was not difficult to do at that time. So obviously there were some benefits and that really helped us grow at a good time. But yeah, absolutely. When you've got good revenue and you can show month-to-month growth and show that you're really, really focused on metrics, then yeah, it's not a difficult thing to do. I think where founders get in trouble, and I don't know if this sort of departures from SME more to startup, but there's this fallacy in fundraising of like kissing a lot of frogs. You have to kiss 1,000 frogs to find. You need to nurture your frogs. I don't know if that's an analogy, but like you need to nurture your frogs. It goes down to what we were saying before. Human beings. At the end of the day, like it's about building relationships and it's about showing people that you are trustworthy, you can build a track record. You say you're going to do this, you do it the next month. You keep on showing the month-to-month improvements. Like that's how you fundraise. This whole idea of like spray and pray. I need to speak to 1,000 people. I need to go to 1,000 networking events. Like it's a waste of time. Find people, build relationships, focus, build your track record with them, focus on generating revenue, and like anyone can do it.
Yeah, interesting. You said something really interesting to me once, and it made me think of a saying. The saying is, build and they will come. And from what you described, build and they won't necessarily come should actually be the terminology in the technology space.
100%. And I would say if you look at like 2021, I think the vast majority, build it and you might have something, but I don't know. There's a lot of technology for technology's sake. And there might be value in it in a different world to the one we live in, but for better or for worse, we live in a capitalist society, right? And if value is revenue generation, then yeah, it's got to be about. So Simon Squibb, obviously his whole thing is getting people to realize they can build their own businesses and do all those amazing things. And he recently released this YouTube video, like an hour, where he's just giving the entire download of like how he's built everything he's built and just putting it all on the table. And I think one of the phrases I picked up was everything is downstream from lead gen. So all of these people spending all this time building. If you're not spending that time building distribution, then it's almost a waste. Like it's the tree falling in the woods, So I think building for building's sake rarely works out.
So now that you've got momentum, you've got both sides of the coin, you've got buyers and sellers, you've got a network of people that want to link, which is the hardest part. Do you still prioritize sales?
Yeah, 100%. Because for us, we're on the venture train, and showing that month-on-month growth is really, really important. And we want to continue building out the best business, biggest business that we can. So sales are always going to be a key engine. But what we are slowly seeing over time is more product-led growth loops. So more startups distributing out the outputs, the reports to their investors, to their advisors. Investors advise say, great, I can get everything in one place. They distribute it out. So now we've only ever targeted marketing at the UK and the US, but we have paying customers in over 80 countries, and we have over 15 paying customers in over 25 countries. Now we have 4,000 customers, so you can see that it's a very small portion. We're talking about, less than 1% come from that product-led growth loop, but we're starting to see it gain more traction. And certainly that's what we will continue to optimize for. But sales are still, of course, a core part of that growth.
Yeah. Yeah, super interesting. I'm in the world where BD is a very large part of what we do, and so how it interfaces with technology is absolutely fascinating. I want to change tack slightly. You mentioned a word earlier that I want to pick up on, and that word was burnout. Now, you talk a lot on LinkedIn about balance, and I just want to get your take on it, right? Because there will be people listening that are of the belief that they have to give every waking moment of their life to their small business, or else it's going to be a failure. I want your take on that. What's your experience in this?
I would say, first and foremost, I'm probably a hypocrite and have been at various times throughout my journey, right? And it's funny, like, the more time goes on and I try to be more real with myself, now I'm at a stage where tomorrow, because we're going through like a lot at the moment, I've blocked my calendar out till 2 p.m. My first call's at 2 p.m. And that's great. And I'm going to go to the gym tomorrow morning because I had a flight early today. And I have that balance. And definitely at this stage of where we are with Connected, it's such an important thing. But I'd be lying if I didn't say year one, year two, I sacrificed everything I possibly could for the business, and not in a good way. Like, I don't say this in a glorifier. Cost me friendships, cost me relationships. Like, I did do everything that I possibly could to try and get it to, get to a level where now I can have more balance. So,
would you do it again?
This is where I'm sure I'm going to be a hypocrite, right? Because I can say here in my rational, logical brain, say, no, it's all about balance. And it's so good, and I should. But putting myself in that shoes of, you know what it's like. You remember what it was like for you year one of building your business?
I've always been. I'm like this, right? I'm all in, and I'm working, and I'm thinking about it, full on. But at 6 o'clock Friday, I'm out. And I'm not back on it until 6 p.m. Sunday. And I do take holidays. I do completely switch off.
Now?
No, 2017, start of the company, right? I had 10 weeks holiday in 2018.
Fair play.
Yeah. But like, for me, it's always been, I see this as a marathon, not a sprint. I want to be doing this well into my 60s and loving it.
Yeah.
And so if I got to the end of 17, end of 18, and I resented the company because I'd lost my mates and I'd forgotten, the reasons why I was doing it, that's not success. So I've always been perhaps a little bit different.
Yeah.
And there were lots of people at the time that thought I was nuts, right? And lots of people that said, firstly, you should raise, and secondly, you're not doing this the right way. You should be giving it. And I was going, look, if there's a sacrifice, there's a sacrifice, but I want to love all of this.
Yeah.
Right? So,
and like feeling your energy, like I can see that you have, you are at a place where it feels very balanced, in a really good way, which is great. And, I think that is the brutal thing of like the venture train, is that almost like you would have to be a hypocrite to be like, I can have that level of boundary with myself. And Yeah, I mean, that's why I was joking, but also serious when I said jealous that you're running a bootstrap business. And certainly that might be the difference next time. The only thing is for me, like, because I've made so many mistakes on this journey, I feel like the next one is like, right, the next one I could go really big, really quick, because now I really know the lessons. And I'm sure that will be like
Yeah.
a continuing trend. But I don't know. I saw my dad, for example, attempt to run bootstrap companies and different worlds, everything else. And, he did amazingly well for himself, considering he was a bus driver and a long distance truck driver, and like changed his life around in his, early 40s, mid 40s, and lost everything in his late 40s. And I saw him struggle to 68. So there's, in my mind, there's like is it better to try and go faster and earlier? Is it better to go slower? I guess there's no blueprint, right?
Yeah. And I think for me, what I've learned on this is that as long as you're aware of what you're doing, so I don't want to make it look like I just, I'm a complete chiller, because anyone that works with me will know that I'm incredibly hardworking. But for me, it goes in like spurts, right? So I call them sprints. So I will put a shift in for a sprint, and then I'll chill, and I'll put a shift in, and I know that when I'm putting a shift in, I'm hyper aware of it, and really importantly, my wife's aware of it, and the people that are around me are aware of it, and so I can sit down with her and go, X, Y, Z's going on. I'm going to be all in for the moment because I need to do 1, 2, and 3. And she goes, okay, I get you. That means a couple of things with our son and what have you. And so logistics just kind of change, the relationship changes, and she's way more empathetic to it. But she also knows that if I get to the kind of the point where I said this is going to calm, or when we get to, the hotel for our holiday, I better have kept my word.
Nice.
Did you see what I mean, right?
Totally.
So it's about being totally aware of where you are every stage in the cycle.
100%. 100%. It makes me think of two things. One, what I'll say is, ironically, when I'm stressed, when I'm going in the thick of it, that's when I'm at my healthiest, because I'm like, right, to deal with this level of stress, I'm in bed 10 p.m. I'm up 6 a.m., not sacrificing the sleep, gym first thing, no drinking, clean eating, fasting. Like, I'm so on it to balance that, to avoid the burnout. Actually, probably when like things are a bit more chilled, that's when I'll be like, oh, cool, we can have some drinks. You know what I mean? So I see that. But what I was going to ask you is, do you think that having a son and having a wife make a big impact on that? Because I can be selfish with my lifestyle, in that sense. Like, my dependence on my employees, right? As we were saying before, I don't have that extra dynamic, but I would like to think, hopefully, I'm a good enough human being that if I did have that dynamic, I would probably have more of the approach that you do.
Yeah. I mean, look, 100,000%, right? And for me, I've got to be at bath time. It fills my cup, and, I don't do all of this so that I can miss bath time, right? I do all of this so that I can be at bath time, and we can enjoy a nice life. Yeah. So no, you're totally right. I just, the awareness piece is hyper helpful, because it means that I don't carry the cloud over me. I've had a busy day, I'm not at dinner thinking about something else. You got to be able to compartmentalize one from t'other. It's not their fault, right? But what's quite clever is that you can filter it. You can go, but when I've had a good day, I can bring that energy. Do you know what I mean? And actually, the thing which has always helped me is writing, and having the ability and creating a little bit of space, 5 minutes, literally, just getting it down on paper and going, where's my head at right now? Download, and then I can go into family life, just being dad.
That's great. And I think that's really valuable advice to everyone. And I find the same thing is, when it is getting overwhelming, even just like writing an email to yourself as if you're writing it to whatever is massive, because you will, if you don't put that energy somewhere, you will hold on to it.
Yeah.
So I think that's really good advice.
I've got some hilarious journal entries that got one that's called read if you're having a wobble.
Okay.
It's really good.
That's like that in case of emergency.
Literally,
break glass.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
okay.
it's so funny in there. And like, you're transporting yourself back into a prior state, and I was in, the vibe to end all vibes at that point.
Mhm.
I was working hard. I was on it. And I was like, I've got to bottle this. So I just wrote this journal entry, which is like, you're at your best when you are solving problems. You're, learning, growing, being a great dad, like being a great husband. You're healthy, active, listening to podcasts, reading books. Like that's the area where you're thriving. Just take some small micro steps back towards that. You have a large amount of responsibility, and it's important that you look after number one. And so I read this thing back and I was like, oh, that's so interesting that's what I captured from there.
That's amazing. I love that. And I totally know what you mean. That's the whole thing of like when I'm in that stressful time, going back to that routine, because that's when you can get that best energy out of yourself. But I love that idea. Next time I'm in that flow zone, I'm going to write something and go back to it. But I've actually had because severe ADHD, so my working memory is pretty poor. So I have a to-do list synced between my phone and my laptop, and if it goes on the to-do list, it will happen. If it doesn't go on there, it never existed in history. So I've had a daily to-do list that I've kept in this document every day since the middle of June 2015. So if I'm ever having a shit time, I can scroll back to September, what's the date? 22nd, I guess? I don't know.
25th, yeah.
25th, there you go. I can go back to September 25th, 2019 and be like, wow, I've grown.
Roei, I feel like we've covered a lot of ground. I want to carry on this conversation, but why don't we let another year pass of connected, get back together, and we can hear about more of the mistakes that you've made.
Amazing.
And I'll share another year's worth of mistakes from my end as well. But, from me, certainly, but I think from our listeners, just your journey is incredible. Your approach to business, I think, is fascinating. And I've learned loads, and I know a lot of people will have also learned loads from this episode. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure, and look forward to doing it again next time.
Lovely.